investigation done by the Observer and the campaign group led by donkeys. I love led by donkeys. I mean, if you want to know what's really going on, check out what they're into. They reveals for the first time details of a Home Office decisions on Rwandans who've been given asylum in the past 4 months, claiming they were at risk from the regime. And the British government accepted that. You're not safe in Rwanda. We're going to house you in the UK. And there's, at the same time, they're saying refugees are safe in Rwanda. We're going to send them there. How's that work then? You might be able to tell me. Joining me now is Daniel Sohenge, who's a director of Stand for All. Am I missing something here, Daniel?
No. First of all, thanks for having me on, Trisha. And no, not missing anything. The whole scheme is, from the very start, has been unworkable, illegal, according to the UK Supreme Court. And we've even found out, the Home Secretary himself a couple of weeks ago admitted that there's still human rights failings in Rwanda. There's huge issues with the government suppressing freedom of speech, persecution going on of opposition parties. We know the Prime Minister's reported work. It's, however you look at this, it's absolute chaos.
And wasn't there something, this is on Monday, the Lords are going to start debating the Rwanda bill. So this Observer piece couldn't have come up with worse stories. The bishops have vowed to water down the legislation, including the Bishop of Durham, the Right Reverend Paul Butler, who sits in the Lords. He talks about it as a poor policy. I'm guessing because he's a bishop, he's used very nice words. But there have been issues, have there not? And correct me if I'm wrong, in Rwanda with people who are asylum seekers there, getting, coming into scary situations themselves.
Absolutely. There was a previous deal that Israel did with Rwanda, which is quite similar, except it was voluntary rather than forced removals to Rwanda. And they had about 4,000 people who were sent there, majority of whom left the country, quite a few trafficked out of the country within a very short period of time. So asylum seekers in Rwanda themselves have huge issues. Only a couple of years ago, about a dozen were shot and killed by the Rwandan authorities while they were protesting for more food because they were starving at the time. They launched a protest for more food and they were shot and killed. So we are not talking a country that by any measure is safe to send people to.
But this government has spent millions. I'm just trying to tally up the stories that I've done over the last year or so. Last one was them training security services to manhandle people onto planes, except no airlines will take any of the refugees. I know they spent money in approaching Stansted Airport. They're not going to take them. This is millions and millions and millions on something that even government advice, legal advice, is telling them, it won't work. Can I be really play dumb and ask what the hell this is really all about?
The cynic in me would say we're looking at a £400 million PR stunt. It's to get one picture of one plane taking off. That's, when we come down to it, that's the reality of it. They've staked everything on this. It's hundreds of millions of pounds that they know will do nothing. To put in perspective, over the last 5 years, Rwanda has processed and accepted 113 asylum claims. Now, we've got a backlog of about 170,000 people waiting on their claims to be heard. My maths, top of my head, you're looking about 7,500 years on that to even start looking at clearing this backlog. The number of people they processed over 5 years, you could fit on a budget airline flight. I mean, it's not a serious proposal by any stretch of the imagination.
But people are going to say, oh, look at the money that we're spending on these illegal immigrants in the UK. Would I be right in saying more money has been spent on this whole Rwanda thing than ever just on the immigrants?
Well, it's a bit of a sort of awkward one because, yes, over time, more money's been spent on accommodation. But the Rwanda plan doesn't reduce accommodation costs. It actually risks increasing it because the number of people, Rwanda has a capacity at most, they reckon, for about
Right.
200 to take 200 people per year in the best case scenario. So you've still got to place people in accommodation while you're waiting to remove them to Rwanda, plus you're paying hundreds of millions of pounds to Rwanda at the same time, when you could be using that money to process applications faster, thereby reduce the number of people in home office accommodation and reduce the costs that go along with that. Now, just to
Yeah.
throw this one out there, if you gave asylum seekers the right to work at the same time, it's estimated that between reduced expenditure and increased revenue for the tax for HMRC, you'd be looking about £8 billion per year, which is about double what we spend on the immigration system. So
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are solutions to this. If we're looking at cost effectiveness, there's solutions which make it far more practical to deal with it in the UK.
Do you know that here's the thing though, it's not sexy. It's not sexy, to be honest, when it comes to the refugee. It's better to paint a picture of these people coming over in small boats to rape and kill us. When I've done stories and I talk to, it's so interesting. The Bibi Stockholm, for instance, I remember doing stories where people were marching and saying this is wrong, get rid of it, and what have you. Not because it was unfit accommodation, which it is, but because of we don't want them NIMBY, we don't want them in our backyard. I did a story at Christmas with some of the very same people who said, actually, I've met a lot of them, and they're doctors, physicians,
Yeah.
nurses, they were lawyers, most of them were really highly skilled and really lovely people. And we know secretly the government has been allowing some of them to work, and it's worked out really well. They're paying taxes, and they don't get the National Health Service for free. Why is this not made public?
It doesn't grab headlines. It's the reality. The head of UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, called it this week by saying this is a fake policy to scapegoat asylum seekers. And that's really is what it boils down to. We're talking channel crossing, small boats account for fewer than half of all asylum applications in general anyway. We've seen a huge increase in other irregular routes being used again. We're back to the back of lorries, but no one's taking a
Yeah.
picture of those. They don't make it to the front pages. So small boats make a big PR thing on the front pages, really easy scapegoat. Government can say, look at this, look at this, look at this, while we've got a cost of living crisis that's pushing millions of people into poverty, and we're wasting money on dealing with this sort of thing that we could be putting into communities. Now, there was a project not that long ago that UNHCR supported in the UK that showed that if you invest in local communities to support infrastructure there for people already living there and asylum seekers, it's more cost effective, it's more humane, and it actually has returns on investment because people rebuild their lives faster. So we know humane options working with communities support everybody better, but they don't grab headlines. They don't make the big splash on the front page. There's no glossy pictures of people landing in Dover. So it doesn't make for an easy scapegoat for the government to deflect from other issues. That's
Yeah.
the way it looked.
And I know people are going to throw up their arms and scream at me, but what the hell? I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. Explain to me, if you will, right? The bottom line is, and we know that most of the refugees, because the Albanian refugee situation is because of work done, is virtually gone away. I mean, the figures are way down on that. But we know the majority of refugees or people coming across in small boats don't do it for a giggle. They're escaping war or
Hmm.
persecution, all of those things, right? So the people coming
Yeah.
from Ukraine, so the people coming from Hong Kong, say we're not, persecution or war. Um, so why is it we can do wonderful stories about all you lovely, and it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. All the wonderful Ukrainian people coming over, um, you know, but the doctors and the surgeons and the veterinary surgeons and what have you, who might arrive in small boats or in backs of lorries, um, they're persona non grata. But they're both, all of them are escaping from the same thing. One lot have a safe route into the country and one don't. Why?
That's a question I ask myself on a very regular basis, and I wish I had a simple answer for it. This isn't a new thing. We've seen this sort of attitudes for years and years in successive governments. But it really is very interesting because there's a lot of talk about, oh, they're coming because of benefits, for example. Now, France has higher support for asylum seekers than the UK.
Yeah,
So that makes no sense. They're coming for hotels. Well, you've got people who are crammed 10, 11 to a hotel room. So we know that's not a reason people are coming. But there's still that demonization that goes on without looking at the reality is most of the people coming come because they have family ties here. So whether you
yeah,
process an asylum claim or not, they are still going to be coming because they've got communities that they can go into. So it's better to process the application and then you know how many people you're supporting within a community than people just going into a community and becoming undocumented and having an irregular status. But this isn't new. We've seen this sort of vilification of refugees for years and years and years now.
yeah, yeah. And we forget, don't we? We forget. Yesterday was World Holocaust Day, and we forget that the only reason we had kinder transport is because we would not take the Jewish adults, just the children. So we've got a we're very good. Britain's very good on many cases, but as you see, when they decide to vilify a certain part of the population, um, and it just so happens in this case that the people that we're talking about tend to have brown skin, and the people we welcome in, okay, so Chinese are different, don't, but they're all escaping the same thing. Britain doesn't have the room for everybody. So just to finish up, what do they do though? I mean, Britain is crammed. What do they do other than spend 400 million? I can't get over that figure. 400 million on a PR stunt.
There's no simple solution, but you start by the process of processing applications, actually going through the systems, increasing the number of people that are you moving through the system as quickly but efficiently as possible. We've seen attempts to speed it up, and what's actually led to legal cases because the claims haven't been processed properly. You've got to process them properly and effectively, but you've got to speed it up and make sure that people aren't waiting. We used to have a 6 month target for how long it would take for a claim to be processed. That was shelved quite some time ago now, and we're seeing people waiting years. That thereby reduces costs in accommodation and everything else. You need to make it safer and simpler for people to seek asylum as well, because otherwise you just have them using irregular routes. You
Yeah,
need to find ways that, for example, people can't fly in to seek asylum because of things called carrier liability fines. An airline can be
yeah,
fined if they are found to have brought someone in seeking
yeah,
asylum, in theory. If you remove that, so people can fly in and then apply for asylum straight away when they land, you've automatically reduced why people are using small boats, solve that problem, and then you process the applications faster. And that's how we need to be looking at this, of recognizing there are good reasons people do seek asylum in the UK, and sending them somewhere else doesn't solve anything because they will come back into their communities that they have ties with. They just won't be seeking asylum next time round.
yeah, yeah. And meanwhile, as I said before, right at the beginning, Britain is accepting asylum seekers from Rwanda. Aye. I'm just still stuck on that 400 million that it's cost because I've just done stories on knife crime. I'm always doing stories on the mental health system and what have you. And people say, oh, well, it's those immigrants coming over here using the services so we can't get to them. No, they don't get them free. They don't get that. So it is just 400 million. 400 million.
It's a huge, huge amount of
Daniel,
money.
it's horrific. Daniel, so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your insight on that. Daniel Sohenge, director of Stand for All, talking about the latest on the whole Rwanda £400 million scheme, which even the government's legal advisors say won't work. Don't even get me started. We will be back with an entirely different